but I can't get there till I do some other things. Good morning, how are you? Wonderful, wonderful. Okay.
What's up?
How are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. Are you speaking to us today?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you guys know each other?
I'm volunteering at ACES now.
She is.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sweet, sweet.
Yeah.
So yeah, so he's gonna do a spiel today.
So
Cool.
I'll spiel. Try to get some more people on board. You know?
Good deal.
Oh, yeah. How you been doing?
Been good. Yeah. How have you been?
You know, just
Well,
another day
it's
of life.
Easter.
It's pretty good.
Nice.
It's very relaxing, yeah,
That's good.
you know, just kick it with family,
Yep.
you know.
That's what it's all about.
That's what it's all about. That's right. That's right. How was yours?
It was nice with family too. It was kind of fun having like spring break and then we had a 4-day school week.
Okay.
And then we had Easter break. So we had a lot of time off of school, which has been nice.
Definitely.
Yeah. It's, yes, they're gonna do the release the things.
Say Wednesday.
Yeah. No, a number of my friends and colleagues are part of that stuff. And it's gonna be interesting to see what, the same day or next week. Yeah. And it sent you an email back saying.
Yes.
About it. So,
How's it going?
all right, great. Yes. Good, good.
Oh, awesome.
Oh, there.
Like the directions that so he doesn't, so it's like that. Yeah.
And Paul was so obsessed with her. She was on crutches from her research.
Oh.
Yeah, so he was so much special treatment. And she was on crutches and she could walk.
Okay, what is this?
No, it's your Easter. Anything that class. I harass her about it all the time.
What?
Every time someone talks about behavior or something on the other side. Yeah. You guys had it yet? The project I'm trying to do with water, just wait till there's a lot he screams at you. He screams at you. Like when you're engaged
So.
Cool.
Want to say thank you guys for being here today after we had a short week this week and we had a long weekend after Easter. So, so we'll go ahead and get started. We have a special guest this morning to spend some time talking about opportunities we'll have to close the educational gap. So we're going to move in that direction. Still want to talk about in terms of looking at Google. We're supposed to be talking about this idea of white supremacy and whatnot. And we'll touch on that a little bit. But I want to kind of get us engaged and thinking critically. So we'll start. We'll probably think for another day. We'll think for another opportunity to gather together to learn more about you. And Lord, let us use everything that you provide us in this class session to be upbuilding and edification of your body and use for your mission. In Jesus' name, we thank you for all these things. Amen. So, a couple of things I want to talk about, and I want you to get in small groups and have some conversations, given the questions that I've asked. So, and before we get to these particular questions in small groups, I want to address a little bit that chart we made. You guys remember that? Remember the chart, right? And so as I was reading your journals, for your reflections on, particularly on the charts, people had some feelings about what this chart represents. And first of all, I want to reiterate that I didn't create this, right? So the dynamics that show up here is not something that I created. And so in some of the comments, people talked about finding themselves largely across the top of this as having easy or open access, being a part of the dominant group, or and then what that meant. And so what do you think, what does that mean to be largely a part of a dominant group? What could that mean for someone? That they may have a lot of power, or at least access to power, right? So they may have a lot of power, they may have a lot of access to power. What else does it mean? Yes?
Sometimes you're blinded to people that aren't having all the power.
Okay, so sometimes you're blinded, or you don't even see the people who don't have power because your position doesn't require you to, right? So your position doesn't require you necessarily to see what other people's perspective. What else? Yes, sir. So you may have higher expectations either for yourself or other people might have high expectations of you, right? What else?
They have more opportunity to like fulfill whatever expectations are. Like it's more, they have just more opportunity.
Okay, so you have more opportunities to fulfill expectations that people have of you, and that they typically are higher expectations, right? So you may have some other stuff. Out of those things, and if you have that chart in front of you, you can just flip open in your notes or whatnot. But out of those things, which of those things do you personally have control over? Which of those did you personally select? So you selected education. Yep, okay, no, I'm just asking, I'm just repeating the question back to you. What else? Which of those things did you select?
Like with size and looks, you can't like completely determine, but you can like have at least some influence on
So you can have some influence on it, but you don't determine what your genetics are, right? You don't determine your genes, right? Yes, ma'am.
Language, I mean, you're born into a language, but you can have the choice to learn how.
So when you were 3 years old, you had the choice to learn other languages.
Not necessarily, but like since then.
So
Like,
since
you're
then,
in
you can-
college, you can learn.
So you can add to that, right? Yeah. Would you say that the majority of those things, are the majority of those things that you chose? Or are the majority of those things that were just presented to you, where you didn't really have a choice? The second? Yeah. Really didn't have a choice in a lot of those things, right? And so when we have feelings about what that means, about being in the dominant group, what I would suggest is recognize what that feeling is, first of all. Because evildoers don't have second thoughts about being evil. That's the first thing. The second thing is that I go to Spider-Man for my motivation around what this means. And what did Uncle Ben tell young Peter Parker?
Your choice.
It's your choice. What did he say?
great power.
With great power comes great responsibility, right? And so when we're in this dominant group, what this offers to me is an opportunity to use my great power either for self-serving purposes or to make sure that I help other people. What it doesn't mean is that I have to be embarrassed or ashamed of the power and influence that I have. I don't have to be embarrassed or ashamed of that. Because the interesting thing is, I didn't ask for that stuff, right? I didn't ask to be as good looking as I am. It's a burden that I have to bear, right? And I'm joking, I'm joking. No, but I didn't ask for those things. But I can use those things for evil or I can use them for good. And I would suggest that our humanity is best exhibited when we're in relationships with other people and when we're in the service of those other people. And you may hear me say this again, but orange trees, right? Orange trees, they produce what? Oranges. And what would happen if I took all the oranges and I squeezed them and I had a bunch of juice and I poured it back into the root of the orange tree? What would happen to that orange tree on a consistent basis? I take the oranges, squeeze them, feed them back to the orange tree. What's going to happen? It's going to die. Why? Why is it going to die? That's not supposed to happen because the oranges aren't for the orange tree. But as human beings, we get confused and think that our gifts and our talents and the things that where we have privilege, that those privileges are actually supposed to be for us. Which is why we get shows like America's Most Idol. Right, that talent show. Right. America's Got Idols. No, what is it? America's Got Talent. And then America's Got Idols. Right? Just America. Oh, okay. So we just worship America. America. You get my point, right? So I'm trying to make a point with my silliness, right? So when we think about this, I don't want you to get depressed or upset and say, Andre is saying that I shouldn't be or have, that's not what I'm saying. What I am saying is, don't get confused and think that those things should be just for you. And so, as a man, there are privileges that I have to recognize, and there are talents and gifts and strengths that I can use to interrupt the system of oppression that's hurting my sisters. Right? So, I'm a goofy kind of guy, and this is funny because I ask sometimes. Sometimes I just do it if it's appropriate. You see somebody struggling with a stroller, you open the door for them, right? Or you see somebody coming, and sometimes, can I get the door for you? Right? I say that because I think that makes it easier. I'm old school chivalry. I think it should still be alive and that kind of stuff. But in more specific ways, there are ways that I show up that I try to be an advocate, and other people will call me an ally. I try to be an advocate, but other people will call me an ally. Right? And so being in both of these positions is important. And I will also say that I also try not to do mansplaining. Is anybody familiar with mansplaining? Anybody ever heard that? Everybody ever heard of white-splaining? So what is white-splaining?
When white people explain equality to what color? To a person of color.
Yeah, so for example, if I'm trying to talk about my experience as a black person, and you start chiming in and say, no, what he's trying to say is that would be white-splaining, right? And as a man, sometimes we can get caught up as trying to be advocates and say, hold up, sister, this is what you're really trying to say, right? And as a man, that's not cool either, right? So there's a balance between being an advocate, using your power, and then all that stuff. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this idea of the education gap and an access gap. And so if you can get into your group, and I want you to talk about these three questions. So this last one is, so what is this gap, right? That we kind of talked about a little bit. So if you get groups of 5, and talk about these three questions. So education for what? Access to what? Because these are some catchphrases. Have we talked about these, or have you seen these catchphrases before? Right? There's an education gap. There's an access gap. So education for what? And then access to what? So when we have this gap, what are they talking about? Right? So you get in groups of 5, and I'll give you about 7 minutes to have this conversation about these three things. All right? Cool. Access to students or China probably has a better chance. So it's like changing, not assessing students based on
Yeah.
English.
Kind of more likely self-residential.
Yeah, so like asking questions like, what would you bring up? All kind of know the general concept. Think like an extravagant, what would you bring up?
Well, they go.
Okay. Like your students, like, I want to go to the next level. That's what you're going to do. Like that's.
Well, I don't know, we standardly look at. Like, when you're. Like farm work. Yeah, so there, that's basically designed to help. Literally, no. Shades and like it's yeah, so this is the biology. Flash. So like everything is like amazing. 4, 3, 2, 1. And so I wanted to peel back some of this stuff, right? So this education gap or access gap is, as folks like to call it. So when you've heard this, let's first use the education gap. When you've heard people use that, what are they talking about? What is the education gap? that people are referring to? What are they, or what context have you heard that in? Let's start there. Yes.
Looking at student, how students look at standards,
So one more time.
how students perform in various tests.
Okay, so how students perform on standardized tests is oftentimes what people talk about in terms of this educational gap. What else have you heard? People have talked about this education gap. Literacy rates. So how well students not only read, and how well they comprehend what they read. Okay, what else? What else have you heard? Yes.
Like cultural biases based on like students of color or students in different social economic classes. Like they're like I had a young development assessment class right now. We're like looking at MCA testing. And it's like little T going to Disney World. Well, if you're a kid that just moved to America, you probably don't understand. So it's like formatting questions in a sense that every student can have a way to do their person question personally.
Okay, so the educational gap in terms of the context in which standardized questions are being asked, right? So that creates an educational gap. Other ways people have heard this used. It's suspension rates, right? So certain groups of kids get suspended at a different rate, which creates educational gaps. So people aren't in the same, how many days in the school year? Is it 161, 121, something like that, right? So if you spend less days than that in, that can also add to this educational gap, right? So now suspension rates, all right? Have people heard of this access gap? And so what do they mean? So how is that different than an educational gap? Or is it the same? Is it different? Yes.
Access to Wi-Fi.
Okay, so digital access, right? Access to Wi-Fi, internet, that kind of stuff. Okay. Anyone else heard of access gap? Yes.
Well, what I've come to understand is like education gap is whether you can meet the standards set, but access gap is whether you have like the resources and abilities to make those standards. So if there's an access gap, then there's probably going to be an educational gap.
Okay, so if there's an access gap, there's probably going to be an educational gap because this is the ability to get the resources to have to close this educational gap. Okay, those sound fair to me. Those sound very similar. All of those things sound like things that I've heard as well and have experienced as a classroom teacher. So here then becomes the core question: education for what? Right? So when we talk about this educational gap, the question we have to ask is education for what? And how did you entertain or talk about this particular question in your small group? What were some of the themes that came out or ways that you talked about education for what? Yes, sir.
We talked a little bit about just the differences in like types of classrooms. So like just making generalizations. If you had a class full of white students and you're teaching that, you'd probably assume that you're teaching most of them to push them on to college. Instead of maybe if you were in a lower income area with a lot more like different races, you would assume that lesser learning knowledge and more maybe go into the workforce, and that could change how you're teaching in class just because you might not even feel like you're making generalizations and that might change how you're teaching. So there's a lot of big things just realizing that like, maybe you are making generalizations.
Yeah, so not maybe you are,
You definitely have those.
you definitely realize, but realizing what generalizations you're making, right? So, and that's the thing I want to make us very cognizant of, is that we are operating with biases. We are. It's not guesswork. We are. Now, this next thing I'm also going to say, but I want you to think about the responsibility of this as well. We operate in a racist system, which means that if we're participants in that racist system, that means that we are what? We're racist. So what I'm not saying is that you're walking around with, white outfits and cone hats and all that kind of stuff. But what I'm saying is
that the system is racist. So not only are we operating with these biases, these preconceived notions about people, but we're also operating with a race-based reality. The same would be said for the fact that most of us operate from a sexist perspective, given the nature of how our society has been constructed. Okay? So, and that looks different for women than it does for men, but we will spend some other time talking about that later. So this question of education for what? And I think it's also important when we try to answer this question, is that I think that may be our tendency, but I think that the scale has flipped, actually, right? So, failing from Harvard, not graduating from Harvard, is a degree. That is a degree. William Gates, computer dude, did he finish college? He did not finish college. Mark Zuckerberg, did he finish college? He didn't finish college. Now, I'm not so sure about Steve Jobs. Did Steve finish college? I don't think he did, but so yeah, Google that one for me, right? So when we talk about this education for what, I think it's very interesting that at a certain level, education becomes irrelevant if you can produce a certain kind of product. Now, I find it, the other thing that I think is very interesting is that the tables have flipped, that when we have lower class individuals, our expectation now is that they go to college. Anybody working, volunteering in a school? Anybody is there any focus on vocational education in that school? In terms of, well, what are they all talking about? Preparing kids for college. That's the push. We're going to get everybody into college. There's a problem with that. Did I tell you the story about my uncle, who's a plumber? No? Okay. So my mom has a master's degree in education, did some matriculation towards her doctorate, so she's all but dissertation kind of thing. My aunt did the same thing, and my uncle is 2 years younger than my mom, and so when he was going to Ohio State to become an engineer, and everybody was congratulating him. They were like, "Oh, go ahead! You'll be the first engineer in the family!" And everybody was all excited, right? So he ran out of money to finish at Ohio State. So in their engineering program. And so he, feeling the pressures of home, so he is one of 9 brothers and sisters, which meant that they all had to pay their own way. My grandmother was, the last time she really worked was during World War II, when she worked in the factory and that kind of stuff. Otherwise, she was, pretty much on welfare. That was how she was able to kind of raise her family. So, given all of that, that meant everybody had to pay their own way. And some of that was loans and scholarships and so forth and so on. So he ran out of money. So what he thought to himself, well, if I can't be an engineer, what can I do that's close to engineering and I can use my hands? And he decided to be a plumber. And so my mom and her sisters laughed at him. They were like, "You're gonna do what? You're gonna waste all your talent and all your stuff on being a plumber?" And he was like, "Yeah." And so, a long story made very short, this same plumber. So first of all, when people had problems in the house, who do they think they called? When there were plumbing issues in the house between the 8 brothers and sisters, the 9 brothers and sisters, who do you think they called? They called my aunt, right? Secondly, he has been to Antarctica, Afghanistan, Iran, no, not Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, I said Afghanistan, and all throughout the United States, being a pipe fitter for the US government, making over $200 an hour. Who got the last laugh? Right? As a teacher, do you think my mother ever made $200 an hour? Never, right? And that includes overtime and all this other stuff. And to travel the world, so forth and so on. So when we talk about this idea of education, education for what? Right? And so standard people talk about these standardized test gaps, they talk about all this other stuff, but what's that really about? And I would suggest that yes, we have to get kids to have these certain standards, but ultimately, are we educating them to be able to be thoughtful in every decision that they make, right? And then we talk about this idea of access gap. Access to what? And what came up in your conversations around the access gap? What were the things that came up for you? Yes.
Lower money equals lower access because community funds the schools.
Okay, so lower money means lower access because community funds the school. What else came up? Yes.
Access to technology, like Wi-Fi, but also access to textbooks, to teachers, to professionals.
Yeah, so access to professionals, to teachers, to the most recent brain development theories that teachers get, right, as they're coming out of school, as they're learning and developing and spending the last week in October actually going to workshops and that. You guys know MEA? You know what I'm talking about, right? So access to what? So what is this gap, right? So we talk about this idea of gap, and we're not talking about the clothes that used to be very popular when I was a teen, right? That was the place to go. It was before what's popular then? Hollister, right? Before Hollister and what was the other one? Abercrombie. Is Abercrombie out? Nobody wears it. It's too expensive. Oh yeah, I mean for college. Okay, so in high school they were big, now, but now it's more Hollister, or
It's like, it's like,
oh, okay, yeah, Lululemon with the whole yoga pants thing, right? Yeah, it's kind of interesting, but I don't know. Anyway, so education for what, and then access to what? And I think what typically did you find out? Did Steve Jobs graduate from college?
He dropped out.
He dropped out. Oh, I'm confirmed.
he audited some classes, but.
He audited some classes, but he dropped out. Why is dropping out of, and then what school was that? Reed College, 2 E's?
Yeah.
Or an E and an I? 2 E's. So Reed College, I know that Mark went to Harvard and dropped out. I know that William Gates also went to Harvard and dropped out. Is that correct? Yeah. So education for what, right? Education for what? Access to what? So I think it's very interesting that what we don't tell students is what we're trying to get them access to. And this is where this access gap is kind of a Trojan horse, right? And even this education gap is a Trojan horse because we don't tell students the truth. What typically gets told about your human experience? Let me see if I can back into the question a different way. How many people have ever heard that you need to be yourself? And that being yourself is good, right? Just be yourself. Yeah, we talk about that all the time, right? We encourage that in young people, so forth and so on. That's not the truth. It's true if being yourself is close to this, to middle class values. Now, how many of you how many of you would consider yourself to be middle class, growing up? Middle class, right? How many times did your family sit down and say, we're gonna talk about our middle class values? Let's sit down and talk about our middle class values. Did that ever happen for you? No. So how do you know you're middle class? Yes.
The community that I grew up in, the access.
So the community you grew up, the access, what else? Schools you went to, the things they talked about, right? All this stuff. Anybody do baseball card trading? Nobody did baseball card trading. Is that just okay? Anybody do Yu-Gi-Oh or Pokemon or what's another? None of that. Maybe that's just a boy thing. That boys do. Do girls ever do trading stuff? No. You rearrange your brother's books. Okay, so you organize. So what books did he have? I mean, what?
Well, it was just like I don't know, like plastic covers, so it was like a few baseball cards.
Oh, he had baseball. Okay, so and did your brother talk to you about the baseball cards? About why he wanted them arranged a certain kind of way?
Yeah, I mean, a little bit.
Okay, cool. All right, so I'm going to cut to the chase because I want to talk about how do we start to close this gap. But this is what we hold. This is what we're trying to get students access to, and this is what we're holding them accountable to. But we're never talking about what this means. So, what are middle class values? Or how you experience them?
Family.
So, what about family?
Um,
What does family look like in middle class values? Single household,
One family, one house.
one family, one house.
2 parents,
So 2 parents,
2.5 kids.
2.5 kids, and a dog that is probably a lab. Or golden retriever, right? What else? What else middle class values?
Comfort.
What's that?
Comfort.
Comfort. Explain.
Air conditioning.
Okay. So AC. So creature comforts. What else? What are middle class values?
Well-rounded.
Well-rounded. What does that mean? Well-rounded.
Children's sports as well as musical activities.
Okay. So music lessons, sports. What kind of sports? Middle class values.
Baseball.
Football, baseball,
American sports.
football, hockey, soccer. Right? What else? Yes. Working hard. What does that mean? Working hard.
At the minimum, appreciating your parents' hard work and then striving to work as hard as they do and trying to get further than they do.
Okay. What else? Middle class values. Hard work. Creature comforts. Well-rounded. 2 parents, 2.5 kids. A dog. A golden retriever named Brandeis. That's the golden retriever on Sesame Street. Down Sesame Street. What else? What else are some other middle class values?
Safety.
What about safety?
Neighborhood.
Okay, safe neighborhood. Do you know your neighbors? Yeah. Cool. So you know neighbors. What else? These are the people in your neighborhood. In your neighborhood. Yes, you don't have no idea what I'm talking about. Yeah. Oh, Sesame Street. Sesame Street. All right. So the safety. You know your neighbors. What about the police?
They're, yeah, friendly. So police are friendly to help. Right? What else? That middle class value used to be polite, right? Raise your hand to speak, take your turn. Right, what else?
Education.
That education is important.
Family dinners and like.
Oh yeah, family dinners,
Religion.
religion. Right? So all of this stuff, we're holding kids accountable to. What about your pants? Pulled up or sagging? Not sagging, right? Yes.
I think there's a very strong perception that how a children's behaviors reflects in the family.
Yeah.
Like a sense of respecting where you come from.
So this is middle class stuff, right? This is all middle class stuff, and there's more things, and we're just making the dramatization. But this is what we expect kids to do. But when have you ever heard someone talk to students about this stuff? Doesn't happen. So when we talk about education for what or access to what, we want them to have access to this, but we've never talked about this stuff. We've never talked about, and it's so funny because middle class, you need to have good credit, checking accounts, savings accounts, right? This is what it means to be in the middle class, to develop this wealth and all this kind of stuff. But we don't teach kids any of this stuff, or at least we don't talk about it openly. But we have these expectations that they know and they behave and they act this way, which I believe that is the focus of the gap. So we expect kids to know these things. For example, the example I was given, your family goes to Disney World on vacation, blah, 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 blah. We start setting that up as how many of you have been to Disney World?
Raise that going in Florida.
I forget which is which.
Land is in California, world is in Florida.
World is in Florida, land is in California, right? Right? But there were just as many people had been there. There were just as many hands that hadn't been there, right? And so if I use that, I'm already starting off with a different kind of worldview about what this math equation is going to be when I use those kinds of examples, right? But this becomes the point of the gap or the access. So how do we get folks access to the middle class, or how do we? And one of the things I would tell my students, and I talked about this before, is that I would not tell them to pull up their pants, but I would teach them when they needed to pull up their pants, right? So when you go into a job interview, pull up your pants, middle class values, right? Are there lower class values? Certainly. Are there upper class values? Certainly, right? And we'll spend some time talking about that at another time. So I wanted to point out the gap, because what we have to do is try to figure out, how do we close this education gap? Part of that is telling students what we expect of them. And not we, but what society expects of them. It's very interesting that the Kardashians make a lot of money. They make a lot of money. But we teach it, what do they make? What do they do? Nothing. But we tell students, particularly in the lower class, that you need to work hard to make a living. Is that true? No, it's not true. And here's the funniest thing. The more degrees I've gotten and the more experience I've gotten, the work that I've done has become easier
more so than hardworking, right? So before I had any degrees, I worked at a nursery potting hosta plants, right? So you know the ones in the store don't come, like somebody has to put them in